The dust from the horizon stung her eyes. But Madeline Byrne couldn't look away there on the crest of the hill. A lone rider cut a sharp silhouette against the amber sky, framed by the dying light of the sun. The figure moved with an uncanny confidence, as though he belonged to the wind and the prairie itself. Madeline felt a strange flutter in her chest, a mixture of fear, curiosity, and something she hadn't felt in years, anticipation. Madeline, 30 years old and striking even in the plainest of attire, had lived alone for nearly a decade. Her dark hair, streaked with sun-kissed highlights, was tied in a loose braid, and her green eyes were sharp, scanning the horizon with the vigilance born of solitude. Her small ranch, hidden among the rolling hills of Wyoming, had been her sanctuary since the death of her husband. It was a place of quiet routines, where her days were filled with tending horses, mending fences, and tending a small garden that bloomed defiantly against the wild prairie. She had learned to be independent, proud, and guarded. But the figure on the hill made her heart beat in ways she had long forgotten. The rider came closer, and she noticed the details, a broad chest revealed beneath a worn leather vest, muscles honed from long days of travel or labor, long black hair catching the sun in a halo of shadow and light, and braided leather adorned with small silver beads that caught the last rays of the sun. There was a wild elegance to him, an unspoken story etched into every line of his body. His horse, a dark bay, moved with a weary grace, its flanks glistening with sweat. Madeline instinctively adjusted the brim of her hat, trying to steady the fluttering in her chest. She had never been so aware of a stranger, and yet the prairie had taught her to observe every detail. The man stopped at the creek that ran along the edge of her property, tying his horse with careful, practiced hands. He did not look around nervously, nor did he appear threatening. Instead, there was a quiet confidence, a stillness that suggested both power and restraint. Stepping cautiously toward him, boots crunching over the dry earth and scattered rocks, Madeline called out, "Evening. Do you need water for your horse?" Her voice sounded smaller than she intended, betraying the mix of curiosity and apprehension rising inside her. The man turned his head slowly, dark eyes locking onto hers. His gaze was piercing yet not unkind, steady and assessing, like he could see through more than the exterior. "That," he said in a low, rich voice, "and perhaps a place to rest for a night. The storm coming from the west doesn't favor travelers." His words were simple, but there was something in the cadence, a subtle poetry that made her lean in closer unconsciously. Madeline hesitated, then squared her shoulders. "I can offer you shelter. It's not much, but it's warm." She realized she had spoken almost without thinking. Her modest cabin, lined with books, jars of preserved vegetables, and a fireplace that struggled against the prairie chill, was her haven, but it was hers. And letting a stranger in was not something she did lightly. The man studied her for a moment, tilting his head. A faint smile touched his lips, a quirk that hinted at both amusement and a hidden sorrow. "Name's Elias," he said, extending his hand. His fingers were strong and calloused, but the touch was gentle, firm yet careful, as if he understood the weight of human connection. "Madeline," she replied, shaking his hand, her pulse skipping at the brush of his skin. The world seemed to shrink around them, the wind softening, the creek murmuring as if to witness the moment as the storm rolled in. Rain beginning to pelt the ground in heavy sheets, Madeline guided Elias inside. The cabin smelled of pine, smoke, and the faint scent of lavender from the small garden she tended outside. She busied herself with lighting the fireplace while he hung his wet coat, the silence between them charged. Neither speaking, but both aware of the magnetic tension pulling at their hearts. Once the fire crackled warmly, Elias finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "You live out here alone?" "Yes," she said, glancing at him. I've managed fine for years. The prairie. It teaches you to rely on yourself." Her voice carried a note of pride, though beneath it lay a trace of vulnerability she rarely let show. He nodded thoughtfully, moving closer to the fire, his dark eyes reflecting the flames. "It seems a hard life," he said, "but I can see you are strong. And yet," his voice softened, almost a whisper, "yet I sense a loneliness that even strength can't chase away." Madeline's heart thudded loudly in her chest, as though he had spoken directly to the part of her she had kept buried. "Loneliness is a choice," she replied, though even to herself the words rang hollow. Elias tilted his head, studying her with an intensity that made her feel both exposed and understood. "Perhaps. Or perhaps it's simply waiting for someone worth the company." The storm raged outside, lightning casting fleeting shadows across the cabin walls, and Madeline found herself drawn into his world, his stories of distant lands, wild mountains, and endless rivers. He spoke not as a braggart, but as a man who had lived fully, seen more than most, and carried the weight of those experiences quietly. And yet, beneath his rugged exterior, there was a gentleness, a quiet humor, and an undeniable longing that mirrored her own. She found herself laughing at his anecdotes, leaning into his presence, and sharing small pieces of her life she had long kept secret. The garden she tended with devotion, the books she read aloud to herself, the music she hummed when she thought no one was listening. In turn, he shared tales of the people he had met, the hardships endured, and moments of beauty that had stayed with him across the vast, unforgiving land. When night fell, thick and silent, the storm having passed but leaving the prairie wet and glistening, they found themselves sitting by the fire, closer than either had expected. Madeline noticed the warmth of his arm brushing hers, the steady cadence of his breathing, and the subtle, almost imperceptible way his gaze lingered on her face. She had never felt a connection like this before, an electric pull that was neither simple attraction nor mere curiosity, but something far deeper, almost destined. Elias finally broke the silence. "Madeline, may I be honest?" She nodded, her pulse quickening. "Of course. I've traveled countless miles," he said, voice low and earnest, "and seen many wonders, but I've never felt the pull I feel now. It's as though fate has led me here, to this place, to you." Her breath caught, the warmth spreading through her chest, a mix of fear, hope, and longing. I don't know what to say," she admitted. "I've lived alone for so long. I didn't think anyone could understand or want to share this life with me." Elias reached out, brushing a damp strand of hair from her forehead. "I don't just want to share it. I want to protect it, and you. Whatever tomorrow brings, whatever storms rise again, I want to face them with you." Tears pricked her eyes, not of sorrow, but of a joy she had thought lost forever. She realized that the prairie, vast and indifferent, had given her a gift she hadn't dared hope for, a man whose presence stirred her soul, whose strength did not overshadow her but complemented it, and whose quiet devotion promised a life richer than she had ever imagined. That night, as Elias slept in the small guest room she had cleared for him, Madeline sat by the window, watching the moonlight dance over the wet grass and the creek beyond. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of rain and lavender, and for the first time in years she felt the exhilarating thrill of hope. Hope that life could surprise her, hope that love could find her even in the quiet, unforgiving expanse of the Wyoming prairie. And as she watched the stars flicker above, Madeline Byrne knew that something profound had begun, a journey not just across the prairie, but into the depths of her heart, guided by a man who had appeared like a storm on the horizon, shaking her world, challenging her solitude, and igniting a fire she could never extinguish. The morning sun poured gold over the rolling hills, casting long shadows across Madeline Byrne's modest ranch. She stood barefoot on the wooden porch, the warmth of the sun seeping through her skin, and inhaled the scent of wet earth mixed with lavender from the small garden she had tended since spring. The night had been cool, leaving dew on the grass and a faint mist rising from the creek beyond the fields. Her thoughts lingered on Elias, who had stayed the night. She hadn't slept much, not out of discomfort, but because the presence of a man who could stir her soul without a word kept her mind alert in ways she hadn't experienced for years. Elias emerged from the barn, brushing his long black hair back from his face, the sun catching the braided leather and silver beads in his hair, making them shimmer. He was shirtless, the morning light highlighting the lean, muscular lines of his chest and arms, the kind of strength that spoke of endless travel and hard labor. Madeline's heart skipped in spite of herself. He looked at her, dark eyes softening as he approached. "Good morning," he said, his voice low and steady, carrying a warmth that seemed to melt the lingering cool from the morning air. "Good morning," she replied, adjusting her apron as if the movement could distract her from the rapid beating of her heart. "Did you sleep well?" "I did," he said simply, offering her a small, crooked smile. "Your fire kept the night from feeling endless." They moved to the kitchen, where Madeline brewed coffee and laid out bread and eggs. Elias watched her with an intensity that made her self-conscious, yet there was no arrogance in his gaze, only quiet admiration. She tried to focus on slicing the bread evenly, but her fingers shook slightly. "You have a remarkable home, Madeline," he said after a pause, reaching over to gently lift a stray strand of her dark hair from her face. "It's practical, yes, but there's care here. There's attention to beauty, even in the smallest things." She felt a heat rise to her cheeks. "It's not much," she said quietly. "Just a place to survive. I like my routines." "And yet you've made it extraordinary," he countered softly. "Not everyone can turn survival into art." They ate in companionable silence, the only sounds the soft clink of dishes and the distant murmur of the creek. After breakfast, Madeline found herself compelled to show Elias her little sanctuary behind the house, a garden she had planted in careful rows, bursting with wildflowers, herbs, and a small patch of vegetables. It wasn't large, but it was vibrant, a rebellion against the harshness of the prairie. Elias knelt by a patch of lavender, brushing his fingers across the soft petals with reverence. "It's beautiful," he said, his voice low. "Much like the caretaker of it." Madeline felt her stomach tighten. "You're kind," she said softly, though her pulse raced. She was unaccustomed to being seen, not really seen by another adult, especially a man with such intensity. He straightened, turning to her, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The prairie stretched around them, endless and golden, but the air between them felt charged, as though a storm was brewing silently in the space that separated their bodies. "Madeline," he said finally, "I don't know if this is bold or foolish, but I cannot ignore what I feel. Something in this place, something in you, it calls to me in ways I have never known." Her breath caught. I feel it too," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "But it's been so long since I allowed myself to hope." Elias stepped closer, so close that the heat from his body brushed against hers. "Hope is not a weakness," he said quietly. "It's a compass. And I've been lost without it until now." They spent the rest of the morning tending the garden together. Elias moved with surprising ease, pulling weeds, lifting baskets of soil, and planting seedlings with hands that were rough yet careful. Madeline found herself laughing at his occasional missteps and watching the small gestures of tenderness that punctuated his strength, brushing dirt off a delicate stem, adjusting a plant without crushing it, pausing to admire the way sunlight caught the leaves dot by noon. The sun hung high and hot in the sky, and Madeline suggested they rest in the grove by the creek, a hidden patch of wildflowers and willow trees she had discovered years ago. She walked ahead, feeling Elias's gaze follow her, and a strange thrill ran through her at the thought that someone so powerful, so mysterious could be so captivated by her. The grove was cool and fragrant, the creek running over smooth stones and catching glimmers of sunlight like liquid silver. Fireflies hadn't yet begun their nightly dance, but the air was alive with the hum of insects and the gentle rustle of leaves. Madeline sat on a fallen log, feeling the rough bark against her skin, and let out a long breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Elias joined her, sitting close enough that their shoulders brushed. She felt the warmth of his arm, the subtle strength of his presence, and the certainty that he was a man who could protect more than just her body. He could protect her heart. "I brought you here," he said, his voice low, "because this is my favorite place. It's private, safe, a place where the world can't reach us." Madeline turned to look at him, the sunlight catching his dark hair and glinting on the beads braided within. "It's perfect," she said softly, her green eyes reflecting the shimmer of the creek. "It feels like it belongs to no one but us." He took her hand, fingers warm and strong, and held it between his own. "Madeline, I've wandered for so long," he admitted. "Seen towns, rivers, mountains, met countless strangers. But I've never felt this. I've never known a connection so deep, so immediate. I cannot leave this place without you in my life." Tears pricked her eyes. "I don't know if I can allow myself to feel this again," she whispered. "I've been alone for so long. I've built walls around my heart to survive." Elias lifted her chin gently, his thumb brushing her cheek. "Walls are safe, yes," he said, voice husky. "But they are also prisons. I don't ask you to tear them down all at once. Let me in slowly. Let me show you that you can trust someone again." Her chest tightened with a longing she had thought dead. Slowly, hesitantly, she leaned closer, their lips meeting in a kiss that was gentle, exploratory, and charged with all the longing of years spent alone. The kiss deepened, soft at first, then more insistent as each realized that this moment was not fleeting, it was a turning point. They broke apart slightly, foreheads touching, breathing mingling. "I've waited a long time for this," Elias whispered. "Perhaps I was meant to find you, and you were meant to find me." Madeline rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart and the warmth of his body. "I never imagined life could feel like this," she murmured. "So full, so alive." They spent the afternoon in the grove, talking quietly, sharing small secrets, and letting the gentle pull of romance thread itself through their conversation. There were no grand gestures, no forced declarations, just a slow unfolding of trust, attraction, and the realization that the world outside the grove could wait as evening approached. The sky painted itself in shades of lavender and pink, the prairie stretching endlessly beyond the trees. Elias took her hand and stood, guiding her back to the cabin. They walked side by side, shoulders brushing, hearts beating in quiet harmony. Madeline realized that for the first time in years, she felt safe, truly seen, and profoundly alive, inside the cabin. As the fire crackled and cast flickering shadows across the wooden walls, Elias drew her close once more. "Madeline," he said, voice low and tender, "I don't know what tomorrow brings. The prairie is vast and life is uncertain. But here, in this moment, I know one thing: I cannot imagine a life without you." Her eyes glistened in the firelight. "Nor I without you," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. She rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart, a rhythm that felt like a promise. The night deepened, and the world outside the cabin became quiet, save for the distant murmur of the creek and the whisper of the wind through the trees. Madeline realized that while the prairie had once been a place of solitude and survival, it had become something else entirely, a place of beginnings, where love had taken root in the most unexpected way. And as Elias held her close, neither speaking for a long moment, she understood that their connection was not fleeting. It was a bond forged from shared loneliness, mutual respect, and an unspoken understanding that they were no longer wandering the world alone. For the first time in years, Madeline Byrne allowed herself to hope not just for companionship, but for love, passion, and a life intertwined with another's in ways she had only dreamed of. The prairie outside shimmered under the moonlight, vast, wild, and endless, but inside the cabin, a fire burned brighter than any storm could ever extinguish. And for Madeline and Elias, the first threads of forever had begun to weave themselves, tender, unbreakable, and full of promise. The prairie had changed since Elias arrived. The fields were greener, the garden brighter, and Madeline Byrne felt lighter in ways she hadn't thought possible. Yet life had a way of testing joy before it could fully settle in. One morning, as she walked through the garden, the scent of sage and lavender mixing in the warm spring air, a letter arrived from the town she had not visited in years. The envelope, sealed with red wax, seemed almost to thrum with urgency. Her hands trembled slightly as she broke the seal. The words inside made her stomach twist. A distant relative had died, leaving her with responsibility for part of an estate she neither wanted nor felt ready to manage. Worse, there were debts attached to the property. If she could not settle them quickly, she risked losing the ranch she had fought so hard to maintain. Elias, standing nearby, noticed the sudden paleness in her face. "Madeline, what is it?" he asked, concern threading his voice as he stepped closer. She showed him the letter, her eyes reflecting a storm of frustration and fear. "It's complicated," she admitted, biting her lip. "This land. It comes with debts I can't pay. If I don't act fast, we could lose everything." Elias read the words, his brow furrowing in thought. "We'll figure it out," he said firmly. "Whatever this is, we face it together." "You're not alone in this, Madeline. I can't drag you into it," she said, shaking her head. "You've only just arrived here, and now I'm asking you to carry a burden that isn't yours." Elias placed a hand on her shoulder, strong and warm. "I've wandered for a long time, seeking nothing and finding little. But you've changed that. What's yours is ours now. I'm not going anywhere. Not if you need me." Despite the certainty in his words, doubt gnawed at her. She had been independent for so long. Letting someone in, even Elias, felt like opening a door she wasn't sure she could close again. Yet, seeing his eyes, dark, steadfast, full of unspoken promises, she realized that perhaps vulnerability was not weakness. Perhaps it was the first step towards something richer, something worth fighting for. Together they rode toward the county seat. The journey was long and arduous, the dirt roads rough and pitted from recent rains. Elias handled the horse expertly, his long legs moving with ease as if he had been born to traverse these lands. Madeline, sitting side saddle, clung to the reins and to him, her heart alternating between fear and exhilaration. They arrived at the county office to find lawyers in town, officials busy with their own affairs. The sight of her name on the paperwork felt surreal. The details were intricate: debts, claims, signatures she had never made, obligations that threatened her very livelihood. As they navigated the bureaucratic maze, Elias stayed close, his presence a steady anchor. "Remember," he whispered during a pause in the proceedings, "we've faced storms before. This is just another one, and we'll endure it together." Madeline took a deep breath, letting his words settle in. She had faced loneliness, hardship, and grief alone for years. Now, with Elias by her side, even the mountain of legal troubles seemed less daunting. his steady hand at her back, his unwavering confidence, and the warmth in his voice reminded her that she wasn't merely surviving anymore, she was living. The negotiations were slow, the hours stretching into days. Lawyers debated, bankers scrutinized, and townsfolk murmured behind closed doors. Madeline and Elias worked tirelessly, reviewing contracts, making small payments, and finding compromises where none seemed possible. The work was exhausting, the pressure immense, yet it revealed something deeper between them, a shared strength that transcended attraction. In the evenings, when the town had quieted and their papers were put aside, they walked together along the river that cut through the outskirts of the county. The air smelled of wet earth and wildflowers, the sound of rushing water mingling with the soft chirping of birds returning to their nests. Madeline allowed herself to relax, leaning against Elias, feeling the steady beat of his heart, trusting him more than she had trusted anyone in years. One night, after a particularly grueling day, they returned to the ranch, soaked from a sudden spring shower, clothes clinging to their bodies. Elias led her to the grove by the creek, the one place they had claimed as their sanctuary. Fireflies danced above the water's surface, their lights blinking like tiny stars fallen to earth. The moment felt sacred, untouched by the chaos of the outside world. "Look at this," he said softly, gesturing at the glimmering pool. "Nothing out there, nothing in the world, can touch this. It belongs only to us." Madeline rested her head against his chest, feeling the steady strength of his body, and finally allowed herself to exhale the tension she had carried for days. "I was so afraid," she admitted. "Afraid of losing the ranch, afraid of failing, afraid of letting someone in." Elias kissed the top of her head, his voice tender. "You don't have to be afraid. Not while I'm here. We'll face everything, storms, debts, fears together. I promise you that." The warmth of the grove, the sound of the creek, and Elias's unwavering presence made her realize that life was no longer something to endure, it was something to embrace. She had discovered that partnership, true partnership, was not just about love, but about mutual strength, trust, and shared courage. Over the following weeks, they managed to settle the debts and secure the ranch. Madeline worked alongside Elias, their hands brushing, their laughter echoing across the fields, their shared glances carrying the unspoken language of deep affection. The challenge had tested them, but instead of pulling them apart, it drew them closer, revealing layers of their characters that had been hidden beneath years of solitude and travel. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the prairie in gold and rose hues, Madeline stood on the porch, watching Elias feed the horses. The sight of him muscular, attentive, with his dark hair catching the last rays of sunlight filled her with a sense of awe she could not put into words. He turned to her, his eyes soft and knowing. "You've changed this place," he said, voice carrying the faint accent of distant travels. "Not the land, not the horses, but the heart of it, and my heart along with it." Madeline's throat tightened. "I never imagined feeling like this again," she admitted. I thought I had closed the door on love, on companionship." "You didn't," he said, stepping closer and taking her hand in his. "You were simply waiting for the right person. And here I am." A breeze stirred, rustling the leaves of the trees and carrying the scent of fresh rain and wildflowers. They stood silently, hand in hand, letting the world fall away until there was nothing but the prairie, the soft sounds of nature, and the undeniable connection between them. Later that night, as they sat by the fireplace in the cabin, their shoulders touching, Elias spoke softly. "Madeline, I know life can be cruel and unpredictable, but I want you to know that I will not abandon you. Whatever challenges come, whatever storms rise, we face them together, always." She rested her head against him, feeling the steady warmth of his chest and the rise and fall of his breathing. "I believe you," she whispered. "I believe in us. I haven't felt this scene in years." The fire crackled between them, casting flickering shadows across the cabin walls. Outside, the prairie was vast and endless. But inside, Madeline discovered a haven she hadn't known she was capable of creating with Elias. With their shared strength and trust, for the first time in her life, she allowed herself to imagine a future unburdened by solitude or fear. A future where love, partnership, and hope were not just abstract concepts, but living, breathing realities. As the night deepened, she felt the rhythmic beating of Elias's heart against hers, and the certainty that whatever storms awaited them beyond the grove and the cabin, they would endure, together. And in that quiet understanding, Madeline Byrne allowed herself to fall fully into a love she had never dared to hope for, love that had proven itself resilient, patient, and unwavering through the trials of life. The prairie stretched endlessly beyond their cabin, vast and indifferent, yet within its expanse, a new world had been born. A world of promise, tenderness, and an enduring bond that neither distance, debt, nor hardship could ever diminish. Madeline felt it deep in her bones. Their story, their love, had only just begun, and this time there was no turning back. Spring had fully arrived on the prairie, painting the hills with wildflowers and tender green shoots. The ranch flourished under Madeline's care and Elias's steady presence, a harmony of strength and tenderness that seemed to make the land itself thrive. The garden bloomed brighter than it ever had, the creek sparkled in the sunlight, and the air carried the scent of rain-soaked earth mixed with lavender and sage. Every corner of the ranch reflected their shared efforts, a testament to their growing bond. Madeline stepped outside one morning, the sun warming her skin, and breathed deeply, relishing the rare sense of peace that had settled over her life. Elias was already awake, tending to the horses with practiced ease. The way he moved, strong, precise, yet gentle, made her heart swell with something she had only recently dared to name: love. She approached him, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "They seem happier than ever," she said softly, nodding toward the horses grazing nearby. Elias looked up and smiled, a warmth in his dark eyes that made her pulse quicken. "And so do we," he said. "It's remarkable how life can feel so full when you have someone to share it with." Madeline's chest tightened with a mix of joy and fear. She had learned over the past months that happiness was precious and sometimes fleeting. Yet Elias's unwavering presence, his steady devotion, made her believe that perhaps, finally, she could trust in permanence. As they worked together that morning, repairing a fence along the eastern edge of the ranch, a sudden dizziness washed over Madeline. She caught herself against the wooden post, surprised by the sensation. Elias, ever vigilant, noticed immediately. "Madeline, are you all right?" he asked, concern lacing his voice. She laughed nervously, though her cheeks flushed. I think I might need a break," she admitted. Gripping his arm, he guided her to the shade of a nearby tree, his strong hand steadying her. "Here, sit," he said gently. She sank onto the grass, breathing heavily, and felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the sun. "I think we might need a bigger ranch," she said, a shy, hesitant smile breaking across her face. Elias raised an eyebrow, a laugh escaping him, dark and rich. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "Yes," she whispered, the truth of it spilling out. I'm going to have a child, Elias." His eyes widened for a brief moment, then softened with awe and tenderness. He knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. "A new life," he murmured, voice thick with emotion. "Our life. Madeline, this is wonderful." Tears pricked her eyes, not of fear, but of joy. The life she had built with Elias, fragile and tender though it was, had blossomed into something far greater than either had dared hope. "I was afraid to let myself hope," she admitted, leaning into his embrace. "But with you, I feel ready." Elias pressed a kiss to her forehead, his lips lingering, and held her close as if to shield her from all the uncertainties of the world. "Nothing will harm you," he whispered. "I promise. We will face everything together, just as we have from the start." The months that followed were filled with a quiet, profound happiness. Madeline and Elias prepared the ranch for the new life that would join them. Building a small nursery in the cabin, planting additional flowers and herbs, and reinforcing the fences to ensure safety for both horses and child. The grove by the creek became their retreat, a place of reflection and connection where they would talk about the future, dream aloud, and sometimes simply sit in silence, hands intertwined. One evening, after a long day of work, Elias led Madeline to the grove once more. The water in the creek glistened under the setting sun, the fireflies beginning their dance over the surface. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and wildflowers, and for a moment the world beyond the trees seemed to vanish. "Look at this place," Elias said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "It has become our sanctuary, and soon it will hold our child's laughter as well." Madeline rested her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. "I can't imagine a life without you now," she admitted. "You've made this place our home. You've made me feel alive again." Elias pressed a gentle kiss to the top of her head. "And you've given me something I never thought I could have," he said. "A reason to stay. A reason to believe in more than wandering. Madeline, I can't imagine a future without you in it." The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the prairie in hues of gold, orange, and deep purple. The breeze rustled the leaves of the trees, carrying the sweet scent of blooming flowers and fresh grass. It was a perfect moment, unspoiled by the world beyond. A memory they would both carry with them forever. Weeks turned into months, and as Madeline's belly grew, so did their anticipation for the child that would complete their little world. The ranch thrived under their combined care, the garden lush and fragrant, the horses healthy and spirited. Each day was filled with quiet joy, the kind that comes not from grandeur but from shared labor, shared laughter, and the comfort of knowing someone has your back through every challenge. One evening, as a gentle rain fell outside, Madeline and Elias sat by the fireplace, wrapped in a thick woolen blanket, their hands resting over her belly. "Can you believe it?" she whispered. "In a few months we'll have a little one here, on this very prairie." Elias smiled, his dark eyes glinting with emotion. "It feels like a dream," he admitted, "but a dream I never want to wake from. This child, this life, it's ours, and I'll protect it, every single day, with everything I have." The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows across the cabin walls, and outside, the prairie stretched endlessly, bathed in silver from the moonlight filtering through the rain. Madeline felt a deep peace settle over her, knowing that their love, tested through hardship and nurtured through shared experience, had reached a new, unshakable depth as spring gave way to summer. The day arrived when the baby was born a healthy, strong child with dark hair and eyes that mirrored both parents. Madeline held the little one in her arms, tears of joy streaming down her face, while Elias knelt beside her, his hand resting on hers, his eyes shimmering with wonder. "She's perfect," Madeline whispered. "Our little miracle." Elias pressed a gentle kiss to Madeline's temple, then leaned down to kiss the baby's forehead. "Our family," he said simply, the words carrying a weight of promise and devotion. "All of this. It's ours to cherish, protect, and love." Life settled into a new rhythm, richer than anything either of them had known. Days were spent tending the ranch, caring for the baby, and nurturing the garden and the grove that had become their sanctuary. Nights were spent by the fire, sharing stories, dreams, and quiet laughter, the prairie surrounding them like a protective embrace. Madeline often marveled at the transformation within herself. She had once been a woman hardened by loss, accustomed to solitude and wary of attachments. Now she was a mother, a partner, and a woman deeply in love. Her heart expanded by the presence of Elias and the new life they had brought into the world. Elias, too, had changed. The wanderer who had arrived on the horizon months ago had become a steadfast pillar, a man capable of immense tenderness, patience, and enduring love. He had found a home not just in the cabin or the prairie, but in Madeline's heart, and he cherished it fiercely. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon and painted the sky in shades of violet and gold, Madeline and Elias walked together along the creek, the baby cradled in Madeline's arms. Fireflies flickered above the water, the gentle murmur of the creek blending with the soft cooing of their child. "I never imagined a life like this," Madeline said softly, leaning her head against Elias's shoulder. "Neither did I," he admitted, pressing a kiss to her hair. "But I can't imagine life any other way now. This is what I was searching for all along." The prairie stretched endlessly around them, wild and free, yet within that vastness, a world of love, family, and belonging had taken root. Madeline knew, with a certainty she had never known before, that whatever storms might come in the future, they would face them together bound by love, trust, and the unbreakable bond they had forged out as night fell and the stars blanketed the sky. The little family returned to the cabin, the warmth of the fire welcoming them home. Madeline held the baby close, Elias at her side, and in that quiet moment, she understood something profound. Love was not about grand gestures or heroic deeds. It was about presence, devotion, and the courage to open one's heart fully, without reservation. And on the prairie, where life could be harsh and unpredictable, Madeline Byrne had found a love that was steadfast, a home that was theirs, and a future bright with promise. Together, they had created a world worth living in, a world filled with laughter, tenderness, and the quiet, enduring magic of a love that would last forever.